Hello and greetings to wherever and whenever you are from Open Doors Metropolitan Community Church in Seoul, Korea. We're a community seeking to live out the radically inclusive love of Jesus the Christ. We're affiliated with the Progressive Christian Alliance and Metropolitan Community Churches. Please join us now for excerpts from our service of Sunday, May 21st, 2017. This is the 6th Sunday of Easter, and the theme is Another Risky Thing for a Preacher to Do. Preaching and presiding is the Reverend Craig Bartlett.
One reading for today from the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 17, reading verses 16 to 34. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was deeply distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he argued in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and also in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Also, some Epicurean and Stoic philosophers debated with him. Some said,
"What does this babbler want to say?"
Others said,
"He seems to be a proclaimer of foreign divinities."
this was because he was telling the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. So they took him and brought him to the Areopagus and asked him,
"May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? It sounds rather strange to us, so we would like to know what it means."
Now all the Athenians and the foreigners living there would spend their time in nothing but telling or hearing something new. Then Paul stood in front of the Areopagus and said, "Athenians, I see how extremely religious you are in every way. For as I went through the city and looked carefully at the objects of your worship, I found among them an altar with the inscription, 'To an unknown God.' What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, He who is Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in shrines made by human hands, nor is He served by human hands, as though He needed anything, since He Himself gives to all mortals life and breath and all things. From one ancestor He made all nations to inhabit the whole earth, and He allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of the places where they would live, so that they would search for God and perhaps grope for Him and find Him. Though indeed He is not far from each one of us. For in Him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said. For we too are His offspring. Since we are God's offspring, we ought not to think that the deity is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of mortals. While God has overlooked the times of human ignorance, now He commands all people everywhere to repent, because He has fixed a day on which He will have the world judged in righteousness by a man whom He has appointed. And of this He has given assurance to all by raising Him from the dead." When they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some scoffed. But others said,
"We will hear you again about this."
At that point Paul left them. But some of them joined him and became believers, including Dionysius the Areopagite, and a woman named Damaris, and others with them. God, may I never lightly presume to preach your word, and may we never lightly presume to hear it. Your word is light and life eternal.
Amen.
Now, a couple of weeks ago, you remember I talked about how risky it is for a preacher to preach from texts that are already well known, such as the ones that came from the lectionary a couple of weeks ago, the 23rd Psalm, John chapter 10, because there's a temptation to think that we know what these texts mean, we already have ideas of them in our minds, and it can be a challenge to try and find that deeper level of meaning. Well, I thought with the Acts reading today, that level of risk continues if we think about what Paul is described to have done here. Now, right off the bat, as a progressive interpreter of the Bible, I will come out and say that I am not sure to what degree that the story in Acts reflects an actual historical event in the life of the Apostle Paul. It's well established, and if you look through the New Testament, this will be clear that some of the events as they are portrayed in the Acts of the Apostles don't necessarily correspond with the sequence of events that are described in the letters of Paul. This is simply a fact. We need to understand that the primary purpose of what we now call the Gospel according to Luke and the Acts of the Apostles, for we believe them to be part of the two volumes in one work. And this is true of the Gospels in general. We need to remember that the primary purpose of these books is not to record events in history. Because for the simple fact that back in pre-modern times, and these were pre-modern times, their understanding, the simple fact is they didn't have the same understanding of history as we do. You don't even know if they certainly didn't have the modern, postmodern sense of what history is. I mean, if you do a standard first degree in history in any university, the first course that you will have to do down in the 1000 level will be a course on what is history. And you will find out very clearly that history is about a lot more than just memorizing facts. There's perspective, there's bias, there are agendas in the various types of history that are written. Quite often, the agendas of those who are in power. As the old adage goes, history is written by the winners. Be that as it may, even if we're not 100% sure about how historically factual this story is, there's a definite theological reason that it's here. Because the Gospels, and this is part of the Gospel, as I noted before. This was written for a primarily theological, religious reason. And if you do an overview of Luke's Gospel and Acts of the Apostles, you'll find, and you'll discover that the purpose is to show how the center of the Christian world moved from Jerusalem to Rome, which was then considered the center of the world. Any connection that any story in Luke and Acts has is put to the purpose of telling this story, of making this point. Now that being said, there is still truth there to be found. There is still a word I'm convinced that there is a word from God which we can discern. Today, I'd like to suggest that it has more to do with risk than with any kind of success that Paul may or may not have had. Many people who have interpreted this story throughout history, especially those who are interested in that field of Christian theology called apologetics, not in the sense of apologizing for the Christian religion, but in terms of trying to give a rational explanation for Christian doctrines. Yes, those of us who are theologically educated, yes, I remember that so well. Well, many people who are interested in this area of apologetics say that Paul's speech at the Areopagus should be held up as the way to present the Christian message to the world, especially the secular world, the thinking world, the academic world, to other cultures. And they say, first, acknowledge the values found in other in ideas, acknowledge the similarities and ideas in other philosophies and cultures, and how almost identical they are to the gospel. And then you go further, you go further and look at the broader outlook, and you try and bring in elements of the other cultures, or of the poetry, or of the philosophical system that you're debating then. And then, after you've done that, present your zinger. That it's the gospel of Jesus which is the ultimate fulfillment of all these ideas and all these musings found in the culture or the perspective that you encounter. Do that right, and you'll have people falling all over themselves ready to convert. You will have convinced them. How nice it would be if it worked like that in the story. But if we go back to the text, we know that it was hard slogging in this story for Paul. He argued with Stoics who had some kind of quasi-religious impulse, and with the Epicureans who at that time dedicated themselves to exposing religious frauds. And they were looking at this guy, Paul, going around talking about this Mediterranean Jewish peasant who was raised from the dead, was claiming the same kinds of titles that were reserved at that time for Caesar, for the Roman Caesar, for the Roman leaders. And it's possible that in this story, they may have viewed Paul, or they may have been portrayed as viewing Paul as just another fraud, just another con person, another bad one. Now, certainly Paul does his best. He appears to quote, there's been some research on this, and as far as we can figure out, it seems as though he may have quoted from the Greek philosopher Epimenides, where it talked about, in you we live and move and have our being. And he also appears to quote from the poem of a Greek poet called Aratus, known as the Phenomena. We are his children. And he's trying to convince his audience that all of this is leading to the one God, creator of all, who's now looking for all the world to repent. Now that God's ultimate action has been accomplished in raising Jesus from the dead. As is put in his first letter to the Thessalonians, I think it is, the first fruits of those who sleep. But, pardon, gentles all. You know how I love to allude to Shakespeare. How successful is he exactly? According to the story, some scoff and go. Others say they kind of brush him off and say, "Ah, yes, we'll talk to you again about this sometime later." And of the people who are named as believers, a grand total of 2. Now they are prominent. Dionysius the Areopagite, this means he has some kind of connection to the Areopagus, which was an important council in Athens at that time. The other, a woman, very much in keeping with what appears to be a concern of Luke and Acts that women played an especially important role in the early church. And how interesting it is that the author of Luke Acts is not afraid to show that Paul's encounter with the Athenians was not that successful. And even though at this time Athens was no longer considered the center of the world, that center had shifted to Rome, it was still held up as a classical seat of knowledge and learning. And the text makes it clear that Paul was arguing throughout with Jewish people, with people who are referred to as the devout, whom we would probably now include among what we call the God-fearers, the non-Jewish Roman and Greek citizens who were happy to follow parts of the Jewish law, and with philosophers. As much as Paul was trying to evangelize them, I can also imagine that all those philosophers and people of other religions may have also been trying to evangelize him. They were probably trying to convince him just as much as he was trying to convince them. I wonder what that would look like in this time, in this place, in this community. Apparently, Peter Rollins, whom I consider one of the new theologians of the age, along with people like Rob Bell and Shane Claiborne and others, in his early theological work, he set up communities in Belfast, Northern Ireland, where he's from, and in New York, and they were called Icon. The communities were called the Icon communities, I-K-O-N. And he was interested in what was called transformance art. That these communities would engage in sort of quasi-religious performance art, which would seek to transform relationships, transform the way we look at the world. Because his basic view is that really Christianity, he almost talks about Christianity as being an anti-belief system. He talks about Christianity as not a set of ideas or doctrinal statements or things that need to be agreed with. Christianity is not some kind of emotional experience that we need to have. Christianity is a way of being in the world which actually critiques the traditional ways in which we believe. And in his work with the icon communities, one of the subgroups he formed was a group called the Evangelism Project. And in this group of people, they would end up going to other religious communities. They'd go to the mosque. They'd go to a Hindu temple or a Buddhist group, or a Kingdom Hall of the Jehovah's Witnesses, or to a Scientology group. I imagine what that was like. And they sat there, and they listened to what these people had to say, and more importantly, they would ask them, and what do we look like to you? I understand that at times in the past this has happened from time to time. I remember Daniel and June telling the story of how they would often visit other churches in Seoul, particularly those churches which were non-affirming. God knows there's a lot of them around here. And I've talked about this idea before, but I'll raise it again. What would it be like if we went out? Not only to other churches, what would it be like if we decided to go to some of the places in areas like Jongno, near Jongno Samga Station? Or if we went to some of the bars out here, if we went to the warehouse, or, number one transgender if they'd let us in. What would it look like if we were there in our church t-shirts, maybe me in my collar? What would it be like if we encouraged the revelers there to tell us, what do we look like to you? What's your perception of us? Would we like the answers that we get? I'll be honest with you, I think one of the most damning things that I could see being part of those, one of the answers being, well, you look like one of us, you just look like everyone else. To me, that would be the equivalent of what I heard one theologian one time describe as a conventional person talking to other conventional people, urging them to be more conventional. Is that the kind of answer we want to get? I guess the one thing that stays with me, though, is that perhaps the real reason Paul is not quite as successful as he had hoped in this encounter with the Areopagus is precisely because he's trying to reason with them. I'll be honest, I'm not aware of any real convincing stories or accounts of someone who has been reasoned or argued into faith. One of the classic things one of the classic teachings that has always stuck with me is the idea that faith is not taught, but caught. I didn't come back to church after 17 years of being away because someone gave me a well-reasoned argument about why I should come back to church and why I should consider this thing again. I came back because I listened to a Christmas Eve sermon online that lit a fire in me that I thought had long gone out. You know, I go back and listen to that sermon every once in a while because I need to. Sometimes when I'm feeling exhausted or burning or feeling burnt out or asking myself, what the hell's the point of all this? And I'll be honest, those moments come. They come to all of us. Sometimes I go back and listen to that sermon, The Christless Protestant, Christmas Eve, 2013, Metropolitan United Church, Toronto. Malcolm Sinclair. One of the best preachers in Canada, I'd say probably in the world. I go back and regularly listen to lectures and podcasts that I've listened to before. In fact, last night I was listening to The Power of Parable, something that I downloaded one time from ABC Radio, a series from John Dominic Crossan. Because I need that reminder from time to time. This is what has got a hold of you. This is really what it's all about. This is what you reach for. And at some level, we all need those things. We all need to be evangelized and re-evangelized. We don't need logical arguments or systems or well-reasoned logic. We need an encounter. Now, I'm not talking about some kind of, opening the skies kind of experience where you think, I've seen God. Or, I've seen the crucified or the risen Jesus, or I've seen the Virgin Mary, or whatever vision you have. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about some kind of quasi-emotional experience where somebody says, I prayed the sinner's prayer and I asked Jesus into my heart. I'm not talking about that. In fact, there's a good internet meme going around saying that, in the scriptures, when people joined the early church, they didn't they didn't ask Jesus into their heart or pray the sinner's prayer or anything like that. They believed and they were baptized. End of story. But what I am saying is that we all need from time to time, we all need to go back and remember a meeting with a person, or remember some saying, religious or otherwise, or remember a piece of music that we've listened to, or remember some kind of practice which will put us back in touch with what genuinely and authentically matters in our lives. We need to get back in touch with that which re-energizes us, with that energy which is God. It's nice and it's interesting to debate from time to time, but ultimately it's an encounter that we need. And so, my prayer for us all is that we may remember the encounters that have evangelized us. which have helped us to catch faith, and which will sustain us when we need it. Amen.
Amen.
Christ is with us.
Now and always.
Let us lift our hearts.
We lift them to God.
Let us give thanks to our God.
It is right to give our thanks and praise.
This table is a table of hospitality, of sharing, and of celebration. We break bread and pour the fruit of the vine because these are the gifts which strengthen our journey together. All are welcome. We are welcome. We remember and honor the justice imperative that is the biblical heritage. Justice is not belief, but action. Not silence, but voice. Not tolerance, but compassion. We remember our common humanity and our common need for just relationships. And so, with all people of faith from every age who yearn for justice, we offer the unending prayer of praise. Holy, 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 God of love and might, all the universe is filled with your glory. Hosanna in the highest. Blessed is the one who comes in the name of God. Hosanna in the highest. We remember the words of Jesus, who called us to a justice that loves wastefully. If you love those who love you, what good is there in that? An outlaw can do the same thing. If you give only to those who give back to you, do you really expect congratulations? Rather, love your enemies, do good, and lend without expecting anything in return. And so we keep the tradition which began when Jesus and his friends gathered to share a meal. Bread would be taken, blessing offered, broken, and then shared between them. And all of them ate. For everyone born, a place at the table. A cup was poured out, blessing offered, and then passed between them. And all of them drank.
For everyone born, a place at the table.
The call to follow justice is easy to issue, but the resolve to follow justice is difficult to muster. Together, in the sharing of this single yet sacred meal, let us be a community that not only issues a word, but follows it. May our community be one that holds the strength of compassion and the resolve to act in the way of Jesus, the Messiah, our Messiah. May we be a community which unites our words with our deeds. For the dignity and the hope of all humankind.
May it be so. Amen.
Thank you for watching. Please feel free to use these excerpts for your own personal worship or devotion, or better yet, join us. We worship on Sundays at the Link in Itaewon in Seoul, and we welcome anyone to join us in our ministry, and we mean anyone. If you'd like more information, please check our website at www.opendooorskorea.org.